Morning, friends. So I'm a big fan of low-budget horror movies from the 1950s, and for my personal tastes, no budget can be too low, no storyline can be too cheesy, no title too corny. The worse it is, the more I like it. Here's a few of my favourites. It just occurred to me, some of you will remember these movies first time around. You're welcome. So here's a classic. It Came from Outer Space. What I want you to notice here is the curiosity created by the title. So here you are, right? You're walking down Main Street, small town America in the 1950s, and you see this movie poster. You immediately want to know what it is. What is it? The best example of this curiosity angle is the poster from the 1954 movie entitled Them. Them. Isn't that genius? So it's 1954. I'm on my way to the soda fountain. I'm wearing my twin set and pearls. Maybe while I'm there, I'll listen to some of that newfangled rock and roll music my parents so disapprove of. And I see this poster. Who are them? What are them? One thing's for sure, them are not us. Let's get that right. Them are not us. Now, what these movies from the 1950s all have in common is that the monster is always out there. The monster is never us, it's always an it, it's always a them. And, a little bit of a historical aside, written as these movies were at the height of the Cold War, it isn't too hard to see what they're getting at. This was a time when the greatest danger to our Western way of life was the it and the them of the Soviet Union. And so moviegoers intuitively understood that the devil girl from Mars wasn't really a devil girl, and she didn't really come from Mars. She was Svetlana, and she came from St. Petersburg. When we were told to watch the skies, it wasn't really aliens we had to be careful of, it was commies and their Sputniks. So for the next few weeks, as a Halloween homage to this classic genre, we're going to do a series called It Came from the Swamp. 2 questions I want you to think about over the next few weeks as we talk about this. What is it? And where's the swamp? What is it? And where's the swamp? What is the danger? Where does it come from? What should you really be afraid of? Where does it live? To get us going, for this I want to teach you this morning from the 15th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. The episode begins by the apostle telling us that, some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem. Now, the word law in verse 1 is a reference to this book. This is the Jewish Torah. So this is the book that Jesus would have read as a child. This is where Jesus' bedtime stories came from. This is the book that Jesus memorized as a young teenager. And it is the wisdom of this book that Jesus teaches his audiences in first century Palestine. And it is in his capacity as a teacher of this simple book that the experts in this book, the Pharisees and the teachers of it, come, notice, from Jerusalem. It's in Jerusalem where the oldest Torahs are housed. It's in Jerusalem where the best Torah professors taught. It's in Jerusalem where the brightest Torah students studied. So what you have in the sentence is the best of the Torah bunch coming to Jesus where he is to examine his knowledge of this simple book. However, you'll notice in the way the sentence develops that the subject of their examination isn't the wisdom of this simple little book. It isn't Jesus' willingness to teach and to obey the wisdom of the simple little book. Look at what it says. Rather, they're interested in his willingness to teach and obey what they call the traditions of the elders. Now, when these people use the phrase, the tradition of the elders, they're referring not to the little book. They're referring to the various layers of teaching and interpretation that had been added on top of this little book by successive generations of Bible teachers. Let me explain how this worked. The first thing I notice about the Torah, and this book's on my shelf in my library, I think with the exception of the book Things I Don't Know, it's the slimmest book. I'll wait for you. It's the slimmest book I've got. It's easily readable, easily understandable, and quite easily memorizable. There's like 300 pages, double-spaced, big print. It's a slim book. And as you would expect from a slim book, it doesn't say all that much. And it's a little sparse on the details. And that being the case, the people who are interrogating Jesus in this episode felt that for the benefit of their congregations, this simple little book needed to be, how can I say it delicately without being blasphemous, clarified. It needed to be expanded upon so that everyone understood exactly what was expected of them by God in this world. And this expansion and explanation in Jesus' day extended into every conceivable aspect of everyday life. For example, there's a simple and beautiful line in the Torah that says, 6 days shall you work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Beautiful, right? Here's what God wants. He wants you to work 6 days a week. 5 days is for lazy people. You've got to work 6 days. All right? Bad news. However, every 7th day, apparently it's important to our Creator that we take time to rest, because rest is essential for life. Beautiful and very simple principle. Work hard, rest hard. Any questions? Didn't think so. Let's move on. However, the Torah teachers in Jesus' day felt that this simple principle was a wee bit too simple. And they felt that being a wee bit too simple, it was therefore open to misinterpretation. And so they added stuff. So for example, they said, if you're supposed to rest on the 7th day, well, you shouldn't walk too far. So you can walk up to 3/4 of a mile in a given day. Got to have your Fitbit or whatever it is people wear to count their steps. And when you get to 989, you got to stop. Too bad if you're on the way to the washroom and you used up all your steps. I don't know how that worked. Guess I'm stuck till morning. And they actually had a rule about this. And they had another rule. If you have all your family round like you did last Monday, and you got to cook a big meal on the day of rest, well, that's not too restful for someone in the house. Right, ladies? Like someone's killing themselves in the kitchen. So we've got to have a rule, no cooking on the day of rest. Then someone, I'm not making this up, someone at the back of the class put up their hand and said, what about if we leave an egg sitting in the windowsill and that egg is cooked by the heat of the Mediterranean sun? Huh? You think about that? So they had a rule. No leaving eggs on the window of your house. And it went on, and it went on, and it went on like that. And so, when these people who make up this stuff come to Jesus in this episode, and they say, why are you not obeying the tradition of the elders? They're not saying, Jesus, why are you not teaching this? They're saying, why are you not teaching all the stuff that we've added on to this? This we kind of get, but the stuff is important. The particular ruling question, as you can see, concerns the washing of hands. So, there's a sentence in the Torah. It says something to the effect of, before conducting a religious ceremony, a priest must wash his hands. Something like that. In Jesus' day, these Bible teachers said, well, priests shouldn't be the only ones who do this. Everyone should wash their hands before all ceremonies. And everything in life is a ceremony. Eating, putting on your shirt, putting on your shoes, everything is a ceremony. So before you do everything, including eating, you've got to wash your hands religiously. And they've noticed that Jesus and his followers weren't doing this, and so they're getting bent out of shape that Jesus and his followers aren't obeying this rule that they just made up. They're not doing nothing that the Bible didn't say. They're just not obeying the other stuff as well, and they are upset about it. And it seems to me that whatever religious background that you come from, and we all come from different ones, this is something that you can all relate to. The Bible doesn't say anything, does it, about not eating fish on Fridays. The Bible says nothing about avoiding chocolate during Lent. The Bible doesn't say anything about condoms or dancing or praying to the saints or all these other things. But we all, in our various backgrounds, have these rules, these customs, these things that are expected of us. And it's stuff we made up. If it isn't in the Bible, we added it to the Bible. And we made it up. And of course, the purpose of all these things that we make up is to modify behavior. This is the pressure that gets piled on us. The more successfully we modify our behavior, the more God likes us. We can, it seems, behave our way into God's approval and presumably into heaven itself. And so the trick then is just to learn the rules, to learn the stuff, to do the rules and do the stuff. God will tick the box and we'll be okay. So here I am. I genuinely, I think, want to successfully live a religious life. I genuinely want to be good in bad situations. And I, just like you, have bad situations that I have a swamp I'm required to swim in. You know what I mean? And I genuinely, in that swamp, wish to be a good man. And so do you, that is sincerely felt. And so the myth is, if I just modify my behavior in these contexts, if I don't eat fish on a Fridays, and if I don't do this, and I don't do that, and if I don't walk 989 steps on the Sabbath, and I never ever ever have an egg sitting in my window, and whatever it is religious people tell me is important, if I do all of that, then I'm all right. That's the myth. The lie I'm sold is that the it, the them, the thing I should be afraid of as a person of faith in the 21st century is something out there. It's a lifestyle. It's a product. It's something on my computer. It's something peddled to me in a high school hallway. It's a new lifestyle being pushed down my throat. It's always something out there. That's the danger. It's never ever what's in here. What's in my own head and my own heart. In verse 3, Jesus goes on the attack. He says, "You Bible experts ask me about something that isn't even in the Bible. Well, let me ask you about something that is in the Bible." He says, "Why do you break the commands of God? For God said in the Bible, in the Ten Commandments, honor your father and mother." And I sympathize with Jesus in this point. Like, it's hard enough to do the stuff that's actually in the Bible without worrying about the stuff that isn't. The context here is that in the first century, it was believed that when your parents got to an age where they were no longer able to financially provide for themselves, it was the job of their adult children to step up and financially take care of them. Food, shelter, that kind of thing. In the ancient world, people didn't have pension plans, they had kids. So that's the meaning of this verse. Here's our culture. We have a culture where we take care of our old people. That's always been the way, Jesus is saying. We always stepped up and took care of the generation that came before us, which is entirely reasonable because they took care of us. But, Jesus says, you say in the stuff you made up, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever help you might otherwise have received from me is a gift devoted to God, he is not to honour his father with it. Now, check out this slipperiness. The teachers of the law who are talking to Jesus in this sentence are based in Jerusalem, and they operate out of the temple. And the temple was not primarily a place of religious worship. The temple was primarily a financial institution. It functioned as first century Israel's central bank. And the people who ran this place of worship, stroke house of finance, amassed vast sums from doing so. Here's how it worked. You could take all your money. There weren't banks in the ancient world. The only buildings in the ancient world with big doors and big walls were castles and temples. So you would take your money and you would deposit it in the temple. It was yours to withdraw at any time, but you could deposit it there. And while it was deposited in the temple, you could say, it's God's money and I can't touch it. I mean, I can touch it tomorrow when I need a new car, but I can't touch it today. And Jesus, as he's travelling all around Palestine, heard this story. A story about how some guy who worked hard his whole life, and now he can't do it anymore because his back hurts, and his fingers are bent with arthritis, and his spine is twisted with age, and he goes to his adult kids, and he says, hey, you know, me and your mum were getting old now, and I just can't do it anymore. It's time for you to take care of me, like I took care of you, as it was for the generation before us and before us and before us. And these scumbag adult kids were turning to their elderly parents and saying, I would give you money, but my money is a gift to God. It's in the temple. Can't give you any. And I can get it tomorrow for stuff I need, but I can't help you. And Jesus is annoyed at this twice. He's annoyed because the elderly are being disrespected. And he's annoyed because people are using the Bible and religion as a means of disrespecting the elderly. And so Jesus points at these people. He's like, what is the matter with you? You want to talk to me about stuff that's not in the Bible? Let's talk about this. It's in the Ten Commandments. It's basic. You can't even do the basics. You don't even know your ABCs. You want to talk to me about silly stuff? And so he says, thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of tradition. Hence his commentary in verse 7. He says, you people are hypocrites. That's it. The word hypocrite, as I've taught you several times before, simply means to act. In the first century, whenever someone used this word hypocrite, they were using it exclusively to refer to the actors and actresses who played the various roles in the Greek dramas that were so popular in Jesus' day. For example, it's thought that the most popular play in the first century in Palestine was written by was a 3rd century BC poem called Jason and the Argonauts. And in that poem, as you perhaps know, the author tells a story of a young man called Jason and his band of Argonauts who sail on a boat called the Argos, and they travel to a place called Colchis in search of a golden fleece. I actually found a clip, because I'm a bit of a nerd, from the 1961 version of the story. Let's have a wee look at it. Most obvious and logical thing to get from that? Please don't say men had better jaws in the 1960s. None of that actually happened. Is that a surprise to anyone? That's just a story that Apollonius of Rhodes invented in the 3rd century BC. And from Jesus' time in the 1st century to the 21st today, audiences have always understood none of that actually took place. It's just a story acted by actors and actresses. And so when Jesus calls these people hypocrites, he's not accusing them of being insincere. He's accusing them of being insincere in things that don't actually matter and that count for nothing. It would be as stupid as saying you live your life as though Better Call Saul was a textbook for living. As though Game of Thrones was somehow a religious dogma that you had to apply to the day-to-day detail of your life. Do you understand? Your religion that you think is so important and the detail that you're so into, it's just fantasy and myth. It does not matter. None of it is real. Then Jesus quotes a passage from the Old Testament. These people honor me with their lips. They behave right. Oh, they behave right. But their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Waste of time. Because their teachings are just rules taught by, made up by, invented by people. In other words, you guys are 100% committed to the wrong things. Your religion, he's saying, is all about modifying behavior, but completely bypasses the vital issue of the heart. And you understand, I know, that when the Bible talks about the heart, it never is talking about the organ that pumps blood around the body. It's talking about who we are on the inside, who we are in our own heads, who we are in our thoughts as we drive to work in the morning, who we are in our thoughts as we sit in the basement, who we are in our thoughts as we think about the stuff we have to deal with in life. God cares about that. About who we really are on the inside, not the person we have learned to behave. Then in the next sentence, Jesus calls the crowd to him and says, listen and understand. What goes into a man's mouth doesn't make him unclean. Pause to note the word unclean. There is, it seems, such a thing as unclean. There is, it seems, such a thing as a wrong life and a right life. But what goes into a person doesn't make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth, that makes him unclean. So the word unclean that Jesus uses here is a first century word that simply means pollution. So have a look at this slide. This is a photograph taken from a tributary of the Yangtze River in China. The normal colour of that river, as I'm sure you know, is yellow. And that is yellow because of clay in the water. However, in this photo you can clearly see that a factory has spilled black stuff into the river. Now, an environmentalist living in the first century would look at an image like that and say the river is now unclean. It is polluted. And it seems God is concerned about those things. We in the 21st century understand that we have polluted the world. We should also understand, it seems from Jesus, that we have a knack of polluting ourselves. And Jesus is saying in this sentence that the forms of our religion, or lack thereof, have got nothing to do with the stuff that really pollutes you. What really matters is the condition of the heart. Who you really are in your own head. And you can modify your behaviour all day long. Goodness knows you have to. But the real issue is what you're like on the inside. Then the disciples came to him in the next sentence and said, Jesus, you offended the Pharisees. Jesus would never have cut it in our culture. You can't offend anyone anymore. Jesus, you hurt their feelings. You offended them. The Pharisees, after all, were the arbiters of what it was to live right. They wrote the rules. And so naturally, when Jesus' followers hear him reject both them and the rules, they don't understand why he does it, and it gets worse. Jesus goes on to say, don't worry. Don't worry about all that religious stuff that you thought was so important, because A, God has nothing to do with it anyway, and B, God is going to get rid of it. Look at the next sentence. Every plant that my Father has not planted, in other words, the rules people made up, will be pulled up by the roots. Leave all that stuff. Leave it all. They are just blind people leading the blind. And they both end up tripping up into a pit. So forget about all the stuff that people have added to this. This is hard enough. But forget about the additions. Because it's not real. It's just a myth. And let's face it, it's not fun. Then in the next sentence, Jesus goes on to talk about food. And the reason he talks about food is because there were pages and pages and pages of rules that had to do with what you could and couldn't eat, who you could and couldn't eat with, and when you could and couldn't eat. Jesus says, don't you see that the stuff that enters your mouth goes into your stomach, then out of the body? And as it enters your mouth, and you know, the whole gut transit time thing kicks in, and it goes out your body, it doesn't touch your heart. Your hamburgers don't affect the person you are on the inside. They have nothing to do with your thought life and your inner behavior. Similarly, our religious stuff doesn't either. You know as well as I do. You can go to confession 7 days a week. You can eat fish on Fridays, hang a crucifix from your rear view mirror, go to a midweek prayer meeting, wear a crisp suit to church, have a big fancy Bible, blah, 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 and not a single ounce of it affects the person you are in your own head. The problem, the issue of what is wrong with us, the thing that we should be afraid of and scared of, isn't out there, it's in here. It's the stuff we carry around in our own heads. Jesus says, the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart. That's what pollutes a person. Do you ever have, probably telling you more than about myself than I want to in asking you this question, do you ever say something you shouldn't say, and it's so bad it even horrifies yourself? I'm so glad you laughed. And your initial reaction is to say, oh, I don't know where that came from. Where did that come from? Jesus would say, I know exactly where it came from. It came from you. It came from you. It came from something that's inside of you. And you say, no, Jesus, that didn't come from me. That's not what I'm like. That's not who I am. And Jesus would say, well, that's because you've learned to have a filter. You've learned to modify your behavior, but every now and again something from inside of you sneaks past your filter and gets out of the way you've learned to modify your behavior and reveals what you're really like on the inside. Bad news. And so what you need to look at isn't your filter, but what you're actually like as a person. Because the stuff that lurks in your own head, that's what you should be scared of. Because eventually what's in there gets out. So for the next few weeks in church, I want to talk about a variety of things that lurk on the inside of all of us. The real monsters we should be worried about. Here's our theme verse for the next few weeks in church. These words come from the book of Proverbs, part of the wisdom literature in the Bible. And they were written by a man who had something to say about pretty much everything in life. He spoke about economics. He spoke about the secret to success at work. He spoke about relationships. He spoke about sex. He spoke about pretty much every area of life. Here's what he said. My son, pay attention to what I say. Listen closely to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them, and health to a man's whole body. Above all else. Check that out. Above all the things that I say in this book about life in this world. Above all my wisdom that will help you succeed at work. Above all my words about economics and relationships and all that stuff. Above all of it. Look at what he says. Guard your heart. For it is the wellspring of life. This is where life comes from the inside, not the outside. This writer would say you lead people at your work from your heart. You manage money from your heart. You are in a relationship and conduct your relationships out of your heart. Your words, your attitudes, your motivations, the way you cope, it all comes from stuff inside of you. And here's the wisdom of the Bible. Guard your heart. The word guard in ancient Hebrew literally means to guard. In those days, people lived in villages, and if they were lucky, those villages had walls. And when they had walls, everyone in the village had to take a turn at night guarding the walls to make sure bad stuff didn't get on the inside to pollute them. And with that image in his mind, this guy is saying to his younger son, son, be careful what you get into your heart. Because as a person's heart is, so their life is. Everything in life comes from the invisible, intangible, mysterious thing on the inside of you. So guard it, for goodness sake. And let's face it, this is kind of new information church-wise, because in church, what we were always taught to do was to modify our behavior. It's all about behavior. Don't do this, don't do that. Don't smoke, don't drink, don't chew, don't go with girls who do. Remember that? Still good advice. But it's all about behavior. We were never taught, or not taught enough, to guard what we were like on the inside. And it's a shame, because life, as you well know, has a tendency to lodge things in your heart. So over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about stuff like guilt. Carrying it around for too long. We're going to talk about stuff like jealousy. We're going to talk about stuff like anger. We're going to talk about stuff like greed. We're going to talk about all the nasty things that are deep inside of us that actually influence how we actually live and behave and cope in this world. And this teaching is going to say that we have a responsibility to guard ourselves. It's no one else's job. God isn't going to do for us what He asks us to do for ourselves. So next Sunday we're going to kick off. We're going to talk about guilt. So it's going to be a great Sunday for those of us who made a mistake years ago, and it's time we got over it. Time we moved past it and found freedom. I'm probably, yes I am, sorry. The Bohemian Rhapsody is starting in 10 minutes, so we need to hustle. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we admit that we are so often spoiled by ourselves. We admit that we are too often our own worst enemies and make our lives far more difficult than they need to be. And so we ask that as we go into this week and as over the next few weeks as a community we consider your command for us to guard what's in our hearts, that you will strengthen us, that you will equip us, that you will set fire to our faith, that you will empower our belief, that we might be strong to do the things we need to do, to get through the things we need to get through, and make it safely to the other side of a brighter and a better and a more hopeful tomorrow. Be with us then and those we love, in peace, in mercy, and in grace, through Christ our Lord.